So what I want to go over today is basic rotoscoping techniques in After Effects. What I want to do in this particular project is I want to take this bit of footage of me playing a ukulele, and I want to put it over the top of this Lego guy so that his arms look like he's playing the ukulele. So I'll just turn on. Let's have a look. Looks like I've deleted this one by accident. There we go. So I'll turn that on, so you'll get this effect whereby we cut the arms out, and if I can get these to animate, then it'll look quirky and funny, and it'll look like a toy's got real arms and it can play a ukulele. My footage looks like this. So if I scroll backwards and forwards, you can see it's moving around. So the idea is to get these arms onto that Lego character. So if you've never done rotoscoping before, it's basically masking off an area or tracking the motion of a piece of video footage. And the way we normally do that is, in this case, I'm using a mask. I'm actually masking off the video footage itself, but you could layer a mask over the top and simply trace around the video footage that you need, and often it's usually a character that you're trying to cut out on a background that's really difficult to key out using a traditional keying method. So if I select, for instance, this character or this video showing me, if I draw using the pen tool and complete the curve, you'll see that it masks out that particular section. And that's what I'm essentially doing in this cutout that I've created here, is I've masked out and used these points to cut out the arms and the ukulele. So I'm just going to go quickly round the video footage section that I want, which is the arms and the ukulele, and just introduce the pen tool and show how you can use this as effectively as possible. So when you draw with a pen tool, you click and you create a vector point. Now you've got a couple of different things you can do. You can simply click on it and leave it where you get a straight vector point, or you can click on it and you can click and drag, and you will get these Bezier curves or these Bezier handles, which will create a Bezier curve. I've deliberately used the ukulele to show the difference there. So if I grab and pull on these handles, I can create quite simple curves, but that still do the job. Because what I don't want to do is to take a curve like this and draw, loads and loads and loads of points around it. Because if I do that, when I come to rotoscope it, I'm going to be animating those points and moving them around, and if I've got hundreds, it's just going to get really time consuming. So what I want to do is make this line as efficient as possible by making the best of these curves and the Bezier handles. And the way I'm doing that is to click and drag all the way around like this. Where I need a straight corner, I can just drag there. Where I need a straight corner, I'm just going to click. I'm not going to create Bezier handles, and when I need a curve, I'm just going to drag and click and drag and create the Bezier curve. So I've been round a piece of footage to save you the bother of watching me do the entire thing, and you can see here where I've drawn around this section that I want, and I've tried to keep it as efficient as possible. What's going to happen is I'm going to animate this path. So the path itself is keyable. So if I click on the mask and open that up, you'll see that mask path has a stopwatch next to it, and I can click and create a keyframe. And that's what I've done in this instance. I've keyframed this position here, and then I've moved the timeline along and I've keyframed it again here. Now there's not a lot of movement between these 2 points, but you can see when I look at, say, this section of the ukulele, you can see the mask does move with the ukulele. And that's because the points, these vector points, their position is keyed at this point, is registered with the key at this point, and then with the next key I've moved it, and that's also registered that position. So when I move backwards and forwards between these two positions on the timeline, those vectors will move between point A and point B. And as you can see, I've got a number of different keyframes in here where I'll be moving these points around. Now there's a couple of things to bear in mind. One is, be careful not to move, if you're using a mask, be careful not to accidentally move the entire layer when what you're meaning to do is to move a point. Be very careful not to accidentally move the layer, especially when you're trying to do a mask over the top of footage, because you may find that things start to get out of sync. The other thing is, it will normally and should give you a warning if you delete a point. And the reason for this is because the points, it keeps the same, what you want to do is keep the same number of points, because you're trying to move these points around. You can delete the points sometimes and it'll do its best to sort of follow up, but sometimes with certain methods it's best to keep the same number of points throughout. And you can see here where I've keyframed particular points in the animation where it's going to the extremes, sort of where it's being held up and where it's being held to the side, and these are my kind of start points. That means that I've got a position there which is keyed and a position there which is keyed, and you can see although it's not perfect, when I move from there to there, it does kind of follow the position. It's not perfect, but what that means is that you can then fill in and tween between these by selecting groups and clusters of points and moving them into position. So if I take this group here and I drag this set, I can actually move them into position as a group rather than moving individual points, which could be really time consuming. So take for instance this section here, I can grab that entire section and I can move it into position. I can click and drag and take a chunk of them there. The other thing you can do is you can take clusters of points and you can also turn them. So if you need to tweak the rotation, press Ctrl T and you'll get the rotation free transform tool. So you can also take whole cluster points, groups of points, and you can take those. So for instance, this section here I'd like to rotate just a little bit. I'm going to line it up with the edge there and I'm just going to drag them into position. And that's going to save you a bit of time, because instead of grabbing, although it's not perfect there, instead of grabbing whole sections of points, instead of grabbing individual points, you can grab them in sections and move them. Unfortunately, there are just going to be elements where you're going to have to just track individual points and move them around, but that will save you time. And what I would do is urge you to do the extremes first and then do the tweening. So say I've got point A here and point B, and then I started to kind of tween in between. The more you tween, because it automatically moves the points in between the keyframes, you might find that some of that tracking is done for you. Say for instance on this arm, although that's not perfect, you'll notice when I move from there to there, it does kind of follow the arm pretty well without me having to keyframe it. Although, to be honest, you're probably going to have to keyframe it individually when you tweak it, but it will save you some time. What I would also recommend you do is to keyframe the entire animation or section. I would mask everything that you need to on every single keyframe. Don't mask a particular section and then move on. I would advise to mask everything around it properly, and then when you move to the next keyframe, mask everything around it again. What I mean by this is that, say from here to there, what I could do is I could say, well, I'm just going to mask the arm and the back end of the ukulele between when I tweak it in this point. But if I do that, it's not going to do that nice interpolation that we saw, where it'll kind of track the arm for you in this particular section. So where you'll see these frames, although it's not perfect, when they move from there to there, it kind of does the job for you. It can be really tricky if you've only tracked or traced around one section of the area that you want to trace, and whilst leaving another area. It's better just to trace around and tweak everything when you're working on a keyframe, and then move on to the next keyframe, rather than just sort of tracing and tweaking the thumb, for instance, or some part here. Just try and do the whole lot in one go. And then, as I said before, do keyframes between each one, so try and get the extremes in and then start doing the tweens in between. So you can see with this particular one, you can see how the keys are moving in between the keyframes, and see how they flex and move around. I try and distribute those keys as evenly as possible, so that if there's any kind of I try not to bunch them up too much. It's really difficult with the handle of the ukulele, with this tuning bit, I don't know what it's called, which is moving up and down, because that's breaking the shape of the arm behind it, so that can be really difficult to track. But on the whole, I'm trying to keep the points roughly where they were at the beginning. So this, where you've got this point here in the corner, I try and keep that in the corner all the way along. So you'll see there, I've tried to keep it in that corner, and that just means it's consistent and it's not moving around so much. Same with the body of the ukulele. You can see where it moves around. The points generally stay roughly in the same places and are tracking to the same parts. With this part here, unfortunately, that moves around a lot, and it's not really possible to do that. So you've just got to kind of make the best of it. So we'll move on to a halfway point, and you can see where I've put in a few more keys in here. And it's a little bit rough and it's very loose, but you can see the kind of tweening that I'm doing here. Notice there's kind of less keys in there where there's not very much motion, and where there's transitions I'm putting more keys in, more keyframes in, to do the tracking as best as possible. And basically all I'm doing is going through and tightening that up as much as possible. You can change the keys themselves, the nature of the keys, by you can move individual keys by using the point tool, and let's have a look. So if I want to move the Bezier curve on this one, if I want to break the Bezier curve from being a continuous Bezier like it is there, if I drag that, you see both handles move. If I then hold down the control button on that Bezier handle and move it, you'll see it breaks that continuous Bezier. So that's ways of getting corners where there weren't previously corners, where it's been rounded and then it moves into corner. That's a way of doing that. You can change the nature of the curve in there. You can also change the length of the curve using the Bezier curves and just changing the handles around, and just generally going over and tweaking each different one as you require. So then if we go to the finished bit of footage, which I've got here, what I've done is I've just added in a drop shadow at the back and things. I've played around with it and added a few layers. It's not really important, but this is just to give you an idea of what the final footage looks like. I've also added a bit of mouth movement in there using exactly the same principle of keying the path, and I've masked out the arms to match the footage and move this backwards and forwards a little bit, and this is what it looks like. It'll take a little bit of time to fill up the RAM. It still needs a bit of tweaking here and there, but you'll see when it speeds up it tracks pretty well. So there you have the animation. I mean, just for general notes, this is this video footage was shot, and the Lego character with the photo was taken in the same room as this background, just to get the lighting the same, so they look like they match pretty well. And I've just added in a drop shadow in between here to sort of make them look like they connect. But that's the basics of rotoscoping in After Effects. and hopefully it should give you some pointers as to how to make a start.